however, this argument is going to be the grit that we spread on the sand so that our tank tracks can gather traction and move out. This is the way we will go. And we will go in the same way from Afghanistan, where already Hamid Karzai can't govern more than his palace. He has American protectors armed around him, and most of his ministers are warlords in the drug trade. This is a democracy. We're now sending more soldiers to defend in Afghanistan. And no doubt soon we'll be able to find some very highfalutin reasons why we've got to go in on the ground in much greater force in Pakistan. Pakistan is a totally corrupted state, from the shoeshine boy to the president, Mr. 10%, via the Inter-Services Intelligence Agency and via the army, which is laced with Islamists, even though it's just got a new commander-in-chief. The ISI set up the Taliban with Saudi money. The contacts with the Taliban are intimate. When, after Daniel Pearl was seized and savagely murdered, I went to the trial of some of those who were peripherally involved in arranging for his kidnapping. I knew Daniel Pearl. He and his wife looked after me when I was very badly hurt on the Afghan border. In fact, Daniel actually gave me his contacts book because they took my contacts book when they were beating me, and I needed to put in all the telephone numbers of all his sources. He let me have them all in my book. And I went to the trial, and afterwards one of the judges gave me a pile of evidence and in English, which they'd amassed, detailed in investigations, interrogations, questioning of suspects and people who were around. And I discovered that Daniel Pearl had made his mobile phone call to the guy he was supposed to have dinner with, the man who did kidnap him and arranged his murder, from the bureau of an ISI officer in a barracks outside Karachi. The ISI knew exactly where he was going and who he was going to talk to. And when I mentioned this to a Pakistani friend of mine who was outside the court, he said, "What do you expect? Who do you think the ISI work for?" And I said, "Well, who do they work for?" He said, "Everyone who pays them." He said, "They'll work for you and me if you have enough money on you, Robert." So this is, how do you decorrupt a country? It's a bit like sort of cancer in every element of your body. You're finished. I don't know. I don't say Pakistan is finished. I'm beginning to sound like Ralph Peters. But Pakistan is going to be the great crisis that you are going to face and look at, and we are, and I am, because I go there. I'm going there in a couple of weeks on my way to Afghanistan for the next 2 or 3 years. Unless, of course, you bomb Iran, or we bomb Iran. Because these days, we have to talk about the West. You know, whenever an Arab talks to me now, it's always you. It doesn't matter that I'm a Brit and I have my PhD in Dublin and that I speak French. No use at all. It's the West. We're the West. I have a Western faith. And that's my betrayal point everywhere. It was a baker in Baghdad who showed me how bad we are as journalists when he said to me once, "Robert, said, can you tell me why you," here again, you meaning you, the Western military, "why are you in Kazakhstan and Tajikistan? French Air Forces in Dushanbe, capital of Tajikistan, flying close air support for the British in Helmand province. Why are you," he said, "why are you going in on the ground in Pakistan? Why are you in Afghanistan? Why are you in Iraq? Why are the American forces in Turkey? Why are American forces training Iraqis in Jordan? Why are you in Egypt? Why are you in Algeria? US Special Forces have a base outside Taman Rasat in the southern Sahara. Why are you in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia? Why are you in Bahrain, headquarters of the US Gulf Fleet? Why are you in Qatar, largest airbase in the region? Why are you in Oman? Why are you in Yemen?" And I didn't know the answer. Because there's a kind of iron curtain we're building through the Muslim world. It goes much further. It starts in Greenland, US forces, Iceland, United Kingdom, US air bases, and British, of course. British and Americans still in Germany. In Bosnia, Camp Bondsteel, US base. In Greece, of course. And that links up with Turkey. From the ice cap, almost to the equator, we've now built an iron curtain, tougher, higher, bigger, more powerful than the one which Winston Churchill first spoke of in this country, which stretched from the Baltic to Trieste and the Adriatic. Why? What's on the other side of this border? Russia, China, India. Is that why we're building it? And why through the Muslim world? You know, I was making these points in a talk I gave in the north side of Dublin, Ireland, a few months ago. And my colleague who was next to me, who was sort of, anchoring the program, Vincent Brown, an old friend of mine who used to work with me in Belfast, although he's a Southern Catholic, said, "But surely, Robert, surely," he said, "isn't Islam a threat to us, really, isn't it?" And I said, "You mean the Egyptian army is in Dublin? You mean the Syrian army is going to Washington? You mean the Jordanian army is in London?" It's not. And somehow we've so believed in the narrative set down for us, the threat, terror, 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 terror. And I understand, yes, 9/11, of course. And the one question we were not allowed to ask after 9/11 was why. I was halfway across the Atlantic. I've said before in talks in Washington, New York, I was on my way to America when on 9/11. The plane turned round, of course, but not until the purser and I had gone around the aircraft together looking for passengers we didn't like, because, of course, we didn't know at that point where the planes had started from. But when I got back to Europe, all the usual suspects rang me up, CNN, Fox, CBS, the Irish radio. And the moment I said, we've got to ask the question, why? No, let's get back to how did they do it? Well, box cutters, tall buildings, aeroplanes, right? Or who were they? Well, Arabs who claimed they were Muslims. But when you said why, Alan Dershowitz in Harvard screamed down the phone at me, you are anti-American merely to ask that question, you're a dangerous person, you are pro-terrorist, and if you're anti-American, it's the same as being anti-Semitic. That is actually what he said. And the point is, if you asked the question why, it meant you were a Nazi. But if you have a crime on the streets anywhere in the United States or Britain or Europe, the first thing the cops do is look for a motive. The one thing we were not allowed to do on 9/11 was look for a motive. You see, because to look for the quote, you might have to say, well, these people were Arabs. The murderers were Arabs. That means they come from a place called the Middle East. Is there a problem out there? And that would mean we have to ask questions about America's relationship with the Arabs, America's relationship of uncritical, constant support for Israel, which is a very unfair support, in that we don't give the same rights to the Arabs in our, quote, peacemaking. I think Israel deserves security. It should be protected. But the Palestinians deserve protection too. And always we go on calling the wall a fence or a security barrier. We talk about the occupied territories. No, we talk about disputed territories. We refer to neighborhoods or outposts of Israelis instead of colonies, which is what they are, illegally built on Arab land for Israelis and Israelis only. I think the only way to defeat Al-Qaeda is by offering justice to the Middle East. Only on justice can democracies be built. And I also believe, and I'll sort of finish my words too by saying this, I think we should have the strongest political, cultural, social, spiritual, if you want, relationship with the Islamic world. We should flood it with our tourists. But we must, I believe, if we want a real peace and to live happily in the future, and happily with these people who share so much with us, we must withdraw all our military forces from the Muslim world. Full stop. End of my chat to you tonight.
Do you think that there is anything that anybody else in these parts of the world can do to kind of influence or take part in American governance? We British have been telling you Americans how to go about your lives ever since you threw us out in the 18th century. But I'll join that long tradition. I don't know as much about America as you know. I think I'm going to go off at a tangent because I can't directly answer your question because I don't know the answer to it, and I hate journalists who blather on about things they don't know. I'm a believer in the United Nations, and so was America. When Allied troops, Canadian, American, British, and French, stormed the shore on D-Day, here we go, another wretched World War II parallel, which I hate, they were called the United Nations. The first British broadcasting news said, forces of the United Nations have landed on the beaches of France. And it was America that set up the United Nations. And it was the winning superpower on the right side, the democratic winning superpower of World War II, the Russians did an awful lot of the fighting, that helped to ensure that we had new protocols to the International Red Cross, that we had, which was, of course, originally based on the Hague Convention before the First World War, that we had the European Union. The Europeans wanted no more war. It was originally an agreement between France and Germany. No more battles of Verdun, no more Somme, no more World War II and Holocaust and occupation of Paris, etc., etc. And all this forest was set up, and the Americans were right behind it. Without the United States, the United Nations would not exist. I was appalled when I went to the General Assembly. I was actually in the General Assembly when Bush spoke on September 12, 2002, and started comparing the UN to the League of Nations. It will be as impotent as the League of Nations if the UN didn't do what the United States wanted, forgetting that the United States refused to join the League of Nations in the first place, of course. But no, the point I'm making is that I think the UN is the only international body which can
influence the governance of the Arab world in a legitimate way. And by all means, with US support, moral support, not just money. At the moment, you have enough money problems without thinking about spreading around the Middle East. And they've got enough money out there. But there is a moral America, just as there was after the First World War, when there was this enormous infusion of belief that you could have a modern Arab democracy. Americans believed the Arabs were as smart as they were. And they are. And the Iranians are too. But, I mean, you wouldn't think it from Ahmadinejad, but as I said just now, I agree with the crackpot. But I think that it's got to be UN governance if we're talking of American involvement, if that answers your question. I know it doesn't specifically, but if you mean, do the Americans have more influence over the Middle East than they...
I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm getting this close. It seems like you're addressing how we can influence their governance. It seems like a principle of democracy is that if you're controlled at all or influenced by a government, then you should have part in that government. Given that we influence an Iraqi, given that the American government influences the life of an Iraqi, and around the world, is there any way, you think, realistically over time, that people around the world that we influence, that we kind of control, can kind of reciprocally have influence back in the American political process so that it's a two-way,
Oh, I see. I don't think little people can fight superpowers. I'm not talking militarily, I'm talking politically. The power of the United States is more evident the further you go from Washington. The nearer I am to the Middle East, the more impressed I am with the physical, military, political power of the United States of America. You need to, I'm sure you've been to the Middle East, but you need to be in the Middle East to feel it and to see it and to realize the inability of individual Arab satraps, let's speak frankly, who are anyway totally dependent upon our financial and military support to influence the United States. I don't see how it would come. The only thing you could say is, well, there's a growing Muslim community in America. But I don't think they feel it as... I mean, I talk to Muslim communities just like I talk to Jewish communities, especially in Britain. I don't think American Muslims have any desire to actually become the representative spokesman of the Arab world. They're enjoying their life in America. They've become Americans, this is completely off your point for a moment. One of the ironies of the Arab world is the fact that, you can open your copy of Al-Ahram in your Cairo hotel in the morning and read an excoriating piece on the evils of American imperialism in Iraq and Afghanistan and so on. And then you take your taxi over the Nile Bridge, and there's the US Embassy with a mile-long queue of Egyptians waiting for green cards, on their passports back. The Quran is a very important document, but so is a green card, and so is a visa, you see. But I don't think small powers can influence big powers, I'm sorry to say. It's got to be done here. Let's have the gentleman in the whitish shirt there. Yes, you, that's right.
Thank you. First, a comment and then two quick questions. One, the comment is thank you very much as a former military officer from the United States Forces. I deeply appreciate you reminding me and everybody else of that creed.
Thank you. I like to have friends in the armed forces. You're a man of judgment and sensitivity, believe me.
And the letter as well.
Thank you. This is a great letter, isn't it?
It certainly is. The two questions are, one, your admonishment to the United States or advice to withdraw immediately from all...
I didn't say immediately.
I'm sorry.
But I meant it. Yeah. Sorry.
Be the current debate, but a withdrawal from all Muslim lands. Do you think that would be viewed as the kind of disengagement or isolationism from the Islamic world that would actually foster even more distance and resentment? That's the first question. And secondly, understanding that you think there are limits to the capability for whomever is president to have a real effect on this, do you think that a Barack Obama administration would foster the kind of goodwill, if only in the way of a scratching of the head of the collective Islamic world, as to, the Americans have sent us another curveball here. That do they really have it? Is all that hope still within them that they have elected this man?
Right. I'm almost tired enough not to remember the first question, but I think I've got it. Look, if we leave